back to season 3 of Content That Grows podcast. We are excited to kick this new season off, and to get started today, I'm sitting down again with 10 Speed Marketing Manager Derek Flint. How's it going, Derek?
Great. I'm super excited for this season. We're digging into a topic we get asked about all the time.
Yes. And the topic is content distribution and repurposing, which I just made it less clean, I guess, by throwing the and repurposing, but it is a huge part of it. So, yes, this season, we're definitely going to be digging in a lot and covering, some of the tactical aspects of content distribution, a little bit of today we're going to cover why it matters and some of the best practices, but also like who should be responsible for repurposing, how to measure some of those efforts. A lot of that stuff is what we're going to go through this week. So as we continue to work with clients from content marketing and SEO to help grow their company, we run into this a lot and see it as a big opportunity for companies to not only create good content and even optimize content that can rank, but really how to get the most of that. And so that's what we're really going to dig into. So really to get started, I think one of the things to just sort of clear up in terms of like content distribution when we're talking about that is like what a lot of the different things you can do as a B2B SaaS company to be distributing content. So I usually kind of rattle off like a quick short list, but we kind of want to be a little bit more detailed. So today, getting started, like email and so if you have a newsletter that goes out weekly or monthly or whatever it might be, that's a great place to make sure you're including some of your best content. But you also potentially are a company that has thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of people in your database that have been past free trials that didn't convert or past leads or whatever it might be. Really could have quite a few people there to be able to emailing that too. So that's a big one to start. Social channels, obviously, so Twitter, LinkedIn, even potentially something like Reddit and Quora, if you have some ways to share it in some relevant conversations or threads there, I think is also really important. There's like other people's channels, so it's easy to kind of get focused on like what you're doing specifically and what you own, but there are also ways to have either partnerships or promotion or kind of cross promotion, co-marketing type of stuff with other people's newsletters or getting called out in their social or Twitter threads or whatever it might be. A number of ways you can do that. Fourth is outreach from the sales team. So we talk sometimes about how the content can also be sales enablement, but really if you're creating great content that's relevant to prospects, then sales team certainly can have the option to be emailing directly to people they're talking to. Hey, this is super. Our team just created this, super relevant to what we just talked about on our call last week or whatever it might be. And if your team is one that texts prospects, then that's also an option as well. And then last two, like private Slack communities, things like that, where there's definitely large groups of people like-minded that are gathered together. If you have ways to share content there, certainly awesome, or someone doing it on your behalf. And then lastly, for any sort of like video, audio type of content, obviously YouTube, podcast platforms, making sure those are getting put out, but really making sure that it's kind of to the full extent. For this podcast, we publish the full episode, the video episode on YouTube, but we also publish clips that we've edited into. So we end up having multiple videos that we're uploading from just one episode. So quite a few there, and I'm sure there's even more that for your particular business you may have some that come through. But when we talk about content distribution, it is not just, like I said, optimize the content and then use organic search as your only distribution. There are a number of ways that you can get that content to be in front of people and consumed by people in native platforms and wherever it's most relevant to them.
Yeah, I think that last point you just made is interesting for like an agency like ours or anyone who's doing SEO in-house as well, which is like we forget sometimes that SEO in and of itself actually is utilizing a distribution channel, which is the search engine.
Yep.
And I think that tends to lead, even like whether it's our own clients or people invested in that channel, they tend to set it and forget it a lot. So the reason I think for emphasizing distribution so heavily in large part is just to remind, like, this doesn't have to sit here and be for this one channel. Find the other parts that align with your content messaging, that align with your messaging and the community you're invested in on any of these other distribution channels, and feel free to use it.
Yeah, and I think another important thing to kind of circle back on is I was just saying a moment ago when I went through the list that there you may be able to leverage other people's audience. And so I think as you're kind of thinking through your distribution strategy and what you want to do with content distribution, it's important to take this variable and understand, which of these are going to get me in front of a new audience potentially, whether that's like social or someone else's audience in co-marketing or in a Slack community, and which of those are going to just continue to kind of like stay in front of my own audience, like your email database, or if it's your private community in Slack that they're in, that may be your audience. But I think that's important to think about, is like how those two relate, because if you're very heavy just on your own audience, then you're not really increasing your reach. But also if you're the opposite, then you may be ignoring kind of a captive audience that you have already available there. So I think that's another thing to think about when you're kind of planning that distribution strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so with that, I would love to just kind of like shift gears a little bit and maybe just kind of jump into like some of the biggest benefits that companies are seeing when they're distributing content. Because as you said before, it's something that comes up a lot with our clients and companies we talk to. And so we're certainly a front row seat to a lot of this. So I would love to have you kind of just share a little bit about what we're seeing with some of the clients and the results there.
Yeah, so the first and kind of easiest thing I think to talk about is just the increase in visibility for the brand and for that content. Obviously, you distribute your podcast on LinkedIn or a clip on LinkedIn, and your logo is there. A lot of times you've distributed that on your own, so your own personal brand is also growing in conjunction with that. And then you get to see that kind of come back if you're running sort of a demand gen, demand capture type strategy. We see it even in our own sales calls where someone will come in and mention, hey, we've been watching the podcast, we love it. Yeah. That's what brought us in. They compare us to other people's podcasts. It makes us feel good, but it also lets us know that it's working. Yeah. I think for a lot of people, it doesn't have to be the primary goal, but a huge benefit of distribution and distributing well is that you are likely seeing increased traffic back to the website because you're distributing content, whether it's, to go, view the product, or it's to view the entire podcast on its own, or they want the long form version of the piece of content you created and took the messaging out of. And then from that, or maybe in conjunction with that, that usually means an increase in revenue or conversions of some type. There could be any type of conversion, obviously, signups to demos to signing up to be a part of the newsletter. I think the other part of distribution that it's just as important, but it gets a little bit away from bringing traffic back, is when you distribute, you get to, say how smart you are, how clever you are, show off how to do things and educate people. But you also get to bother them less by letting them stay on the platform that they're on, delivering full value right there. Yeah, I think that's a huge win in terms of like how people perceive you or perceive the company. They feel less sold to. I just got off a call this morning with one of our clients who mentioned that like that distribution, and we hear other agencies say this all the time on their social media platforms as well, which is it has the potential to shorten sales cycles. We've seen that with some of our clients, where getting that content out in front of them helped either the sales team shorten it, or it just naturally created a shorter process because they saw what they needed to. Yep. I quickly jumped into some of our clients' analytics just to kind of get an idea of like those high level benefits around traffic back to website and also revenue. And I'll break them down by their industry, which is the B2B SaaS company I grabbed had a 12 0.5% traffic back to website based on distributing their SEO focused content. And they saw plus 38% revenue associated with that content. And that means if it's plus 38 in addition to what they saw via SEO.
Right. Yeah. So you're talking about all channels.
Yeah.
Not just organic. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when we hop down and we see, a direct to consumer SaaS company, they saw a 160% traffic back to website. That kind of speaks to like how much of their community is off and ready to be distributed to and are fans, and they're ready to jump back into the website because they trust them. And a plus 101% revenue associated with that same content that was originally designed for search engine optimization.
Yep.
And then
that's huge.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think we both know who that is. And then D2C ecom, plus 9% traffic back to the website from distribution, and plus 122% revenue associated.
Yep.
These numbers kind of fluctuate, and there's a lot more story and context to be told to some of them. Obviously, when you see 12% traffic back or 9% traffic back, we're also talking about websites that regularly or routinely see, 30,000 to close to 100,000 visits per month. So that percent shrinks down. But I don't think there's any CEO or C-suite executive that would like balk at whether or not you should be distributing based on those numbers.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's also like two things come to mind. One is, whether you're looking at traffic or revenue, like if someone, it's like a CEO comes to you and says, we need to do 40% more revenue in whatever, next quarter or whatever the like time period may be. I think a lot of people could kind of like spin their wheels and like, well, we're already doing, content and SEO, and I don't know if we can grow 40% from that. And then you start looking at other channels or paid or whatever, and like this is a huge point of proof that I think there's so much untapped potential for a lot of companies because they aren't doing distribution. And honestly, I could argue that probably every single one of these isn't doing nearly as much distribution as they could be. So this is not even probably like fully tapped out. This isn't someone who has this massive machine of distribution or, a huge team or anything. It's just they're doing some, and then they're seeing these kind of results. I think that's really big. And the other thing I was going to say, when you mentioned like shortening sales cycles, is I think that's a topic that's been discussed a fair amount, is that, is it that they're actually shortening the sales cycle, or it's just that they spent more time before they engage with you. They spent more time learning and like building trust in you and like beginning to trust you more and that kind of stuff, that when they do finally engage, it's shorter. And so I think that's a huge point in this, is like, when you have that content that's going out, people are seeing you, you're building that brand, building that trust, and they come in, you've already shortcut a lot of that trust that you would try to build in the sales process, and makes that much, much easier. So huge point of leverage there too, that is probably much, much harder for most marketers to measure and really like definitively say, well, whatever, like buying cycle just improved by 10 or like shortened by 10% because of content. That's kind of a tough thing to attribute, but I think that's a huge part of it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the most exciting part. When we were talking about it, we were definitely like, we were both kind of surprised. I mean, it's obviously like an intention. It's something you want to see, but when you jump into that with someone and you realize that the sales cycle has been shortened, it sort of is just like more proof, more fuel for the fire to like, well, we should be creating more content. It gets those other teams excited about distributing it. Like all of a sudden your sales team is sort of like, oh, interesting. Same with customer support and retention topics.
Yep, totally.
Great. I think like the next place to sort of take this is probably to talk about, what are some of the major or just common mistakes that a lot of companies kind of trip over. They make these mistakes when they're distributing their content.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, so we probably can't hit everything, but like, one of the big ones that we talk about a fair amount, and I think others do too, is like we are years past the days when you would just write a blog post, go on social and be like, here's this new blog post, here's the link, go check it out. So that is like much harder to get people to actually go do that at this point. I mean, it is possible, but I think the big aspect, the benefit there is really like taking the insights out of a blog post or a piece of content and making that available on social. So just posting the link, not a great idea. I think similarly, like automation was a big thing for a while. Like, oh, cool, I can publish this and it'll automatically post to like social accounts and I can call it good. Like I'm there, I'm building an audience, I'm building awareness, whatever. But it's just like it's not nearly as effective. And similarly with social is there are tools that allow you to post the same social content basically to all of the networks that you choose, but cross posting without like tailoring it to the network, and just like each network kind of has its own feel and like the way people talk and write, and so you're not like tailoring it to that, then it can make some or all of those posts feel very off and unnatural within the platform, and therefore just less effective because it's just odd for the people encountering it. And then I think like the other one I would just mention, or two more, would just be like you can't just distribute stuff and just sort of be like constantly pushing stuff out without also like engaging or being human or interacting in some way with people and channels. And so some of them, email, for example, it's definitely much more of like, I'm sending this and you're receiving it. But certainly within the social platforms, I think it's important to be just active and engaging wherever you're distributing. And then lastly, I think it's important to have clear ways for people to come back and learn more about your company, or follow you, or subscribe to a newsletter, or listen to a full episode of a podcast, or whatever it might be. So just making sure you have some thought around that, I think, is necessary. And when people are not doing that, that's definitely one of the big mistakes as well. What comes to mind for you?
I think I've lived out, and so for me, it's usually the automated versus manual distribution, and the cross-posting without modification, just from firsthand experience, which is, I think if it's the simple act of like working a muscle, I think it's fine to like automate some things, right? You're sort of just like, I just want to be more consistently here, and like this is the thing that's gonna do that. I just think it if you lean on it too much, right, you're the person screaming into the void who's never interacting with the comment section, or maybe your next post doesn't lead off of the comments you're seeing. If you go way far out there, you may even like miss kind of overall what's happening in your industry as it steers. Like marketing's always steering. Right now, it's like everything's demand gen. And if you miss that, it can be sort of odd for the people who are engaging with you because you're a participant in all things marketing. And then cross posting. I had a while where at the beginning of this year, it was just my way of making sure I was getting on both Twitter and LinkedIn. I was more heavy into Twitter, and verbatim, I was posting the same thing on both accounts. And it almost comedic in the sense of like how dramatic, how something was crafted and positioned. It would perform on one and never the other. It was like everything that would perform really well on LinkedIn just wasn't punchy enough for Twitter, or it wasn't like delivering this sort of like list thread style thing. I also think like LinkedIn posts can be like a little wordy and like stream of consciousness, to where like a Twitter thread, not that many people are actually that they're moving fast on Twitter. So they, unless they really care about you, they want the payoff.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I, as much as I dislike when people post a screenshot of their tweet on LinkedIn, I would say that in some ways it feels slightly better than just taking the content and posting it verbatim, because at least it's like, here's the content, but then I'm adding additional context around it with the text on this post along with the image. So
yeah, I think it can be a great prompt for sure.
It.
Yeah. It's not.
Don't love it. Yeah,
it's low energy, which is kind of a way we could add that to the list of mistakes made, which is thinking that like distribution and repurposing is sort of low energy. It's definitely a means of efficiency that can't be taken for granted, but it's only going to succeed if you're not just doing everything low energy.
Yeah, totally. And I think that it's a matter of how you look at it too, because like it's low energy in the sense that it's much easier to keep creating more social posts or ways to distribute an existing, whatever it might be, blog post or podcast episode or whatever. It's much more low energy to do more distribution on content that already exists than to go create another good, high quality piece of content in most cases. So from that perspective, it's low energy. But to your point, if you treat everything distribution as like, I just got to get this task off my plate and I want to make it as quick and easy as possible, then yes, I think you're missing out on what you could do if you actually put in the time and effort to do it well.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, we joke about it, but like even our own LinkedIn, our time spent on LinkedIn is like a point of contention, right? Where it's like, okay, well, how long does it take you to do that? And then, a really solid LinkedIn post can take 45 minutes to an hour. Mm-hmm. Right? But you can't do it every day. Or maybe you can. Maybe you've figured out how to do that, or you spend your own free time doing that. But yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah, which is, even that, like, in terms of the repurposing side of it, like, I know that it is also very effective to reuse with little or potentially no, probably just little bit of modifications. Like something you posted on LinkedIn 4 or 5 months ago, you can definitely post again. Mm-hmm. And so even that, if you think about it from that perspective, 45 minutes, but you post it twice or maybe 3 times, that starts to divide that time down a bit more versus I purely put 45 minutes in for one post. It came and went and that's it. So, so I think there's a lot to it, but yeah, I think with anything, you certainly can become pretty obsessive. Making TikTok videos, you could sit there and try to edit it down for hours, or taking multiple takes on something, or you just do it and be done with it in like 5 minutes. So, it's super interesting. But I think, with, kind of coming off the mistakes, then I think we should probably do the flip side and talk a little bit about like the best practices, and I would kind of love to start and just kind of hear what you feel is most valuable within the best practices for companies to understand.
Yeah, I think when I think about best practices for distribution, the first thing that comes to mind is be distributing regularly. I originally had it written down as like always be distributing, but I think it's important to like factor, like, you may not distribute every piece of content a million times. You may be producing too much content to be able to distribute all of it. If you're, running a certain SEO strategy at a certain clip, there's only so many days, and LinkedIn really only wants you to post once or twice. So I think regularly be distributing on the channels that make sense, where you've got an audience. I think what you distribute matters. So, distribute the like valuable how-to stuff, the things that people really want to engage with and learn from, based on where they're at. I think a major focus and best practice is when you're originally creating a distribution plan, it should align with your content marketing strategy as a whole. And what I mean by that is you've probably set goals for certain parts of your content program. So, for example, if your podcast does a really great job at generating leads for you, then I think, plan to distribute more of the kind of ratio or percentage of podcast clips so that more people are seeing that. It tends to speak to the audience you want it to, and it drives the overall goal. We lightly touched on this already, but I think whether you include a link in your distribution, if it's on social or wherever, or you don't, I think just have some intentionality about choosing to sometimes do it and sometimes don't. Just kind of set up your audience to expect that you're not always going to be asking something from them. Like you said earlier, you could distribute that same post in 4 or 5 months. They probably won't remember, and then that time you'll include the link. I think this maybe contradicts something I said a little bit earlier, but not entirely, which is I had a back and forth with someone on LinkedIn who, was pointing out like there's certain content we build that I don't want to distribute, or like, do I really want SEO how-to content to be distributed? It doesn't really speak to the expert in the room. It's kind of high level, but it serves an organic traffic purpose or something. But I still sort of stick by, if you wouldn't distribute it, why did you create it? Which is it. There are reasons to justify how-to content, but also there better be a section within that how-to content that any level of person approaching that article can learn from. Even if it's like, what is an ICP, right? Is your article, well, great. I bet you've got a section in there, about what tools they can use, etc., that it's going to be valuable to anyone. I think in general, if you're a small team, you ought to be distributing and repurposing, because it allows you to kind of look like a much more proficient, larger team. Because you're able to get creative with all these efficient modes of essentially saying the same thing with different hooks, different metrics, different, opinions and tones that can appeal to a lot of people. And then I think this is a big hurdle for a lot of companies, but it's getting your teammates or your company and all of the people involved in creating that content to be so excited about that content that they're also sharing it, and active. And even if they're not sharing it, just like active on the distribution channel, like, I don't know, 5 people today told me that Metadata bought a company because, right, they like are all there and sharing their content and sharing their podcast or webinars, etc. So I think anytime you can get your team involved, that's a huge best practice and win in the distribution model.
I agree. And especially on that last one, I think the evolution of things, if you look at like Twitter from like 2010 to 2020, I think there was a lot more desire and interest from people to like actually follow brands and like even interact with brands on social and like have more of those conversations. And I think I don't know if it's the pandemic timing or something else, or just a natural shift over time or what, but I do feel as though it's definitely much more heavily now that people like want to interact with people. And definitely on LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn never really had quite the traction of like following a company page the way people would follow a company Twitter handle. But both are true. Like, I think it's just like there's a person here and this person's vouching for it. It's not just like, you know, this outsourced social media team running a company account somewhere. It's just sort of like hitting quotas or whatever. And it's like these are real people at the company, you know, vouching for this, putting their name behind it, like all that kind of stuff, and totally willing to engage or react or discuss in comments and that kind of stuff. So, so I do think that's a big one, and certainly I think a shift that's still ongoing. But yeah, I mean, I think overall it's a great list of the best practices, and I totally agree with like, if you wouldn't distribute it, why would you even create it? I mean, I think that's really key. And I think we're a little bit past that now. Like the world of SEO for a while, I think had this like, hey, it's totally cool to just create this crappy content that's like just totally optimized for search, but like we're gonna kind of put it off on this part of our website that like most people on the site won't necessarily find it, but search engines will, and it'll rank and it'll do well. But we wouldn't share it. Like I think we're past that in the SEO space. But then, you know, again, from a content marketing point of view, I think you should always question if there's something you're wanting to create but you wouldn't distribute it. Like why then? Yeah. So
yeah.
There's a lot there.
I think an example of that is we've been running like an ABM light strategy, I guess is what I would call it, right? Where we're looking for, you know, accounts and clients and companies, and being new or newer to that space, and kind of best practices and things of that nature. Like, I would love to be able to Google what is ABM, you know, what's a great strategy for this, and like find an answer that means something. Yeah. And it's completely possible within SEO. It's just like how you frame it. Yep. So yeah. Anyways, that's kind of a rant. It's my 2 cents on that part.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's good. And the other thing I wanted to circle back on was you mentioned distribution strategy aligning with the goals, and I think that's really important because, like, yeah, at the beginning I kind of gave that list of like different ways you can distribute, and like if our message is you should definitely be distributing content, you modified your always be distributing into like consistently be distributing. That does not mean, you know, write a blog post and then you have to like put it everywhere you possibly can every single time, because if your goals are free trials or like signups or pipeline or even just like pure revenue, closed won revenue, then you should definitely be thinking about distribution differently than if your goals are more awareness focused or, you know, engagement or like some of those higher in the funnel type of metrics. So I do think that's a really important thing, is understanding what your goals are, how they align, and then ideally, if you know there are things that are good for the overall brand and for the company distribution-wise and they don't align with your goals that you're giving, then ideally you can be having those conversations and saying, well, you know, what about this? Like, I'm being incentivized here, but like we want to do this too because it's just the right thing to do and good for the company. So can hopefully lead to some good conversations around goals and alignment there too.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
Cool. Anything else you want to add on this topic before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think we covered a pretty decent at this sort of like high level stage. I'm excited to see all the conversations around specific other distribution topics.
Yes, me too. Cool. I don't think I have anything else to add either, so we'll save anything else for future episodes. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. Definitely check out 10speed.io/podcasts. We have all of the interview episodes we did in season 1 available on there, as well as all of the episodes from season 2, where we kind of went through all the elements of sort of building that content program for a SaaS company. So definitely check that out. And then you can also sign up there to be notified when new episodes drop, or you can follow us on Spotify, subscribe on Apple, any of the podcast platforms you use. So thanks so much for that, and we will see you next time.